The path of a master is a commitment to a lifetime process of learning, doing, and then applying what was learned. And along the path, when the path diverges in the deep woods, it is the master that takes the path less traveled by. So the story I'm going to tell is about just such a man, Dr. L.D. Pankey, who on his journey encountered 9 different turning points that influenced his philosophy for a meaningful life through total patient care that made all the difference and changed the practice of dentistry as we know it, and the reason that there's a Pankey Institute today. Now I realize that history is only important for what we can learn by it. This story is so important because what we learn is that the power of purpose is not I wish or I hope, but it's a firm commitment to improve the quality of someone's life that makes all of the difference. Dr. Pankey was so frustrated that when his mother told him that she had had all of her teeth removed and she was wearing dentures, and it was absolutely the worst experience of her whole life. And when he heard this, he made a commitment at that point that he would never remove another tooth as long as he practiced. And he would dedicate the rest of his life and his practice in dentistry of helping people know the importance of saving their teeth for a lifetime in comfort, health, function, and aesthetics. And he said that once he made that commitment, he felt like there was an invisible hand on his shoulder that guided him into interpersonal relationships with people he'd never met and to situations that provided the knowledge he needed to continue his journey and achieve his purpose. So maybe this is your opportunity to learn Dr. Pankey's philosophy and take it as your own and build a life of harmony, incorporating love and worship and play combined with your wonderful work to help people, the total patient care, not just fixing something on the tops of their teeth. The first character in our story is Daniel Halley Smith. And Daniel Halley Smith was born in 1879 on a farm that raised and bred horses. And as a young child, he thought he wanted to be a physician like one of his relatives. I presume it was his uncle. And one day, he and his cousin had been playing around outside in the barn, and they came in to raid the cookie jar. And they got down to the very last cookie, and they decided, well, how are we going to do this? Well, let's cut it in half. So Daniel, being very creative, of course, he said, well, here's a small hatchet. You hold the cookie. And, of course, you all know what happened. He severed the end of his cousin's finger. And the gush of blood and the cries of anger and pain from his cousin, he said, I don't ever want to be a real physician and see all that blood. So in later years, when Daniel was a teenager, he decided he became interested in dentistry, working with gold and porcelain, where he could help people save their teeth. So in 1898, he joined the University Dental College at Northwestern. That's when G.V. Black was their first president. During the summer of 1899, after his freshman year, the family finances reversed, making it doubtful that he would ever be able to return to school in the fall. So he got a job working in the office of Dr. Frank Davis, a prominent dentist in Chicago on Michigan Avenue. He was just doing odd jobs cleaning up the lab. One day while he was cleaning up the lab, when Dr. Davis and his family were on vacation, he heard some music coming up from Michigan Avenue. And he looked out the window and saw a circus parade. So he went down to the street to watch the parade pass by. Down on the street, the parade stopped, and right in front of him was Mrs. Murphy, a chimpanzee, was in a cage, and the trainer was walking along beside her. Daniel noticed that the chimp's lip was severely swollen, and there was swelling under both eyes. And he went to the trainer and asked, "What's the matter with your animal's face?" The trainer said that they had shortened those long eye teeth and couldn't get anyone to treat the animal now. So Daniel told the trainer he was a dental student and he could help her if the trainer would bring Mrs. Murphy up to the office after the parade. "I'll bet she has abscessed teeth," he said. Now, ask all of you, can you believe that after your freshman year in dental school, you would offer to operate on a chimp and remove the nerves and do root canals on a chimp that was in pain? Well, after the parade was over, the trainer brought Mrs. Murphy back up to the office, and Daniel opened the nerve canals to drain them, releasing the pressure. Very, very gently, he said. And he filled the canals a few appointments later, and he placed gold crowns on both cuspids, most likely gold shell crowns. He was constantly careful not to cause Mrs. Murphy any pain. At the last appointment, Mrs. Murphy jumped into Daniel's lap and gave him a big hug. The trainer said that chimp only did that when people were especially nice to her. Daniel said, "My reward was enormous. At that moment, I felt so enriched. I knew that I could experience these feelings and help mankind through my profession." As they left, the trainer handed me a box. The gift was enough money to assure my re-enrollment at Northwestern. And he said, "You know, the key is that we hadn't discussed money at all. I hadn't done the work with money in mind." What a lesson I had learned at the right time in my life. And I ask all of you, what if we would approach each patient, first of all, to listen, to hear their needs, and to see if we could help them out of their pain or their discomfort without the thoughts of money in our mind. For several years, the circus advertisements included a picture of Mrs. Murphy, the only chimpanzee in the world with gold teeth. Note that Daniel had not treated Mrs. Murphy. He would not have become a dentist and Dr. Pankey's #1 mentor. Daniel graduated from Northwestern University in 1901, and he became an associate of Dr. Good, a very famous aesthetic dentistry on Michigan Avenue. And Daniel learned all the advanced technical dentistry and was impressed by now how much he didn't know that he didn't learn in dental school. Have we not all experienced that? He met many wealthy patients, and he really liked the lifestyle that money could buy. There was also a young French dentist in the office as an associate for Dr. Good and learning the advanced techniques. The French dentist invited Daniel to visit him in France. Well, Daniel's vision was expanding, and he wanted to see how people in Europe lived. So in 1902, Daniel went to France to visit, and then he decided to stay. And it took him 6 years to learn French and acquire a European dental license to practice. Now, if Dr. Hallie Smith had not moved to France, Dr. Pankey would not have met him 32 years later. He traveled widely in the dental office in Germany. He met the Kaiser Wilhelm, who invited him to his estate to see horses and spend time. As he progressed, he met many leaders of the world who became his patients. And years later, the Aga Khan gave him a Rolls Royce just as a token of appreciation for his excellent care. Dr. Smith married a former Russian countess, and they lived the life of rich and famous. So now let's leave Dr. Hallie Smith in Europe, and we will visit him in 32 years. Now enter Dr. L.D. Pankey. He was born in 1901, the same year that Dr. Hallie Smith went to Europe. His father owned a dry goods store, and Dr. Pankey taught and learned the importance of keeping the overhead low to increase the profits. And he was working part-time in a local dental office, cleaning up and doing some minor lab work. The high school in Shawnee was not accredited, so the family moved to Evansville, Indiana, so he could graduate from an accredited school. There he worked part-time for an advertising dentist, and the advertising dentist says, "Don't ever do that. I would never do that again." Well, Dr. Pankey graduated in 1924 from the University of Louisville Dental School. And his first main goal, like many of us, was to make money to pay his dental school loan. And he wanted to practice in Louisville like all of the other dentists did, where the rich people lived. However, his mentor, Dr. Crutcher, his advisor, and he owned the dental supply company, said, "Dr. Pankey, you need some experience." And he advised him to go to a small town in Newcastle, Kentucky for a few years, and then he could come back to Louisville. So LD moved. He accepted his offer of the loan of $5,000 to buy Dr. Hamilton's practice in Newcastle, and he accepted his offer. Dr. Pankey practiced in Louisville instead of Newcastle. He may not have later moved to Coral Gables, at Dr. Hampton's urging. So all of this plans, this is a turning point where Dr. Pankey moved to the right place at the right time under the right conditions. LD worked in Newcastle night and day. He said the first day he had 9 patients, and the second day there was 15, and after that he was too many, he couldn't count them. And a large percentage of his practice was making dentures, and he called them hooked partials. He also met his future wife, Anna Pierce, whom he later married. His practice thrived, but he was unhappy. Patients only wanted extractions and dentures. He tried to diagnose and sell them, get the wording, sell them on a treatment plan, but they didn't want it. People with money always went to Louisville for their dental care. Dr. Hamilton wrote Dr. Pankey several times encouraging him to move to Coral Gables. He said, down here the people are wealthy, they all have money. Well, it's important that a letter from Dr. Pankey's mother came, and when he opened it, I am happy that you are doing so well in your practice, but I hope you are not doing to your patients what has been done to me. I've had all my teeth out and now have dentures. This has been the unhappiest experience of my life. She was only 42 years old. In his book with Bill Davis, Dr. Pankey wrote, she had lost the 4 things that I have spent the rest of my life trying to learn, use, and teach dentists to give to their patients: comfort, function, health, and aesthetics. It opened a door to a vision that the goal should be to save patients' teeth for a lifetime, if at all possible. And you know, my feeling is that if he had not pulled so many teeth and made so many dentures, he may not have felt the guilt that he was creating the same unhappiness that his mother was experiencing. His commitment to never pull another tooth became his brand and his life purpose. In the 18 months that he was in Newcastle, he had earned enough money to pay off his school loan of $3,300, his practice loan to Dr. Crutcher of $5,000, and he bought a new Nash coupe so he could drive to Florida for $800, and he had $1,000 cash reserve. He had made the commitment that he was going to move to Coral Gables as Dr. Hamilton had encouraged him. And so on his final day, he had extracted 81 teeth for 12 patients at $1 a tooth. And that was court day on Monday, December 1925. And as he drove down to Florida, he told me, he said, I made a commitment to myself I would never take out another tooth as long as I lived. I had promised myself that I would devote the rest of my life to learning how to save people's teeth. Some way, somehow, I was going to learn to communicate to my patients the importance of saving their teeth. He said, at that moment, a peace came over me that I had never experienced before or since, as though I was having a religious experience. I came peace with myself, and a weight was lifted off of my conscience. Now, understand these words. It's so important. He said, I did not know how I was going to do it, but I had decided to dedicate my life to saving people's teeth. This became his firm commitment for the rest of his life. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I would learn how. In arriving in Florida, I had passed the Florida Dental Boards. And in 1926, in September, a hurricane came and blew the top off of the building. So I couldn't practice for 3 months, and I went back to Newcastle and married Anna Pierce. And when I came back, the real estate boom had ended. Now, the building manager had a toothache. This was the 4th turning point that really affected the development of Dr. Pankey's philosophy and his commitment to save teeth. The building manager came in with a toothache and wanted it extracted. And Dr. Pankey said he didn't extract teeth. However, he would take an x-ray, and if the tooth could be saved, he would save it. If the tooth could not be saved, the building manager could go to the exodontist in Miami to have it removed. The x-ray showed that the tooth had deep decay, and Dr. Pankey offered to place a zinc oxide and eugenol in amalgam, temporary filling. He said that the man, if it wouldn't charge him if the tooth was not comfortable. The man demanded to have the tooth out. Okay, but don't come back until you want to save teeth. Dr. Pankey said he felt he had to affirm his commitment to his purpose of no matter what relationship he had with that patient. The owner of the building came to see Dr. Pankey when the office manager reported, "Dr. Pankey kicked me out." Well, after Dr. Pankey explained his commitment about extractions and what really happened with the manager, the owner, his wife, and children became patients, and they became good missionaries for the practice. And Dr. Pankey said that what has come to be known as the philosophy started in that office in Coral Gables. In 1928, he learned about the Munson articulator, which reproduces on a 4-inch curve the curve of Spee and the curve of Wilson. So every case he restored to a 4-inch curve. Dr. Pankey completed 5 cases in just a few months, and he considered all of them failures because he didn't understand occlusion. So he started back doing just patchwork, maintenance dentistry, which later he called the holding program. Now the 5th turning point, which is one of the major turning points in Dr. Pankey's path of his mastery, was enter Mrs. Blanchard. Mrs. Blanchard was a very wealthy widow, and she lived up in Boston and in Maine, and she came to Florida in the winter. She had graduated from the Sorbonne in Paris, and she lived on Beacon Hill in Boston. And she walked into the office without an appointment, and she said, "I want to see the dentist who did not believe in pulling teeth," which was his brand. And I'm asking you, what is your brand by which people refer patients to you? Because the neighbor that Mrs. Blanchard lived next to in Florida said, "You ought to go to my dentist. He doesn't believe in pulling teeth." So she walked into the office, and she would not sit in the reception room. She wanted to speak personally with Dr. Pankey. She related that the 2 dentists in Boston and 1 in Maine had said she needed all of her teeth extracted and full dentures made. She was in pain, and she agreed to a comprehensive exam. Dr. Pankey advised her to have 2 teeth removed by the Miami exodontist. He made a treatment plan, and he quoted her a $1,000 fee, which was unheard of in those days in 1930. She accepted, and he did operative procedures on the upper anteriors, and he restored the lower posteriors using the Munson articulator, carving the cusp tips compatible with the incisal guidance by the cuspids. He built the upper posteriors using a chew-in technique, the FGP, functional generated path, if you will, which was taught by Dr. Taggart, described back in 1912. He used a copper band tube impression of the prepared teeth with modeling compound, and he made an amalgam die on which the wax pattern was made. He heated the occlusal with a hot spatula and did a chew-in, carve, and cast. She enjoyed her teeth until she was 81, and she never lost another tooth. Mrs. Blanchard always waited in Dr. Pankey's private office before her appointment. One day she read the ADA journal in his office and asked him if he was going to Paris for the International Dental Conference. He said, I haven't given it much thought. Why do you ask? Her reply was, "I think you should go. You will meet outstanding dentists in the world and learn those new techniques." Well, the next time she came to the office, she asked him again if he had given any thought attending the dental conference. And he asked, "Why are you so interested in me going?" "You could learn something there. I really think you have great potential." LD kind of chuckled when she said that, and he said, "That's kind of a backward compliment, I guess." Well, frankly, he said, "I can't go. I have a new practice, and I have a young child." She insisted, saying, "I want you to go, and I want you to travel first class. I would like to pay all of your travel expenses as well as compensate you for the time you will lose from your practice while you're gone. Now will you go?" He replied, "That certainly will put a different complexion on it." She also wanted him to travel to London, Florence, Rome, Vienna, and Heidelberg. Can you imagine the power of trust and the power of purpose that she envisioned and incorporated, that she could trust this man and provide him with the opportunity of a lifetime? So it's interesting that just about a few weeks before Dr. Pankey was to leave to go to Paris, who should come in but Dr. Frank Davis from Chicago. And during one of the visits, Dr. Davis said he knew that LD was going to Paris and suggested that he should look up a dentist who had been his lab cleanup boy while the boy was going to dental school at Northwestern. Dr. Davis reported that he had heard that his former cleanup boy had the most outstanding dental practice in the world. Now that got LD's attention, and his name was Daniel Halley Smith. Dr. Davis sent a letter introducing Dr. Pankey to Dr. Halley Smith. If Dr. Davis had not retired in Coral Gables, he would not have met Dr. Pankey and encouraged him to meet Halley Smith in Paris. Dr. Pankey left, and the first stop on his visit was with Dr. Broderick, one who wrote the textbook on dental medicine that Dr. Pankey's study group had used in a study nutrition. Dr. Pankey spent 1 week studying with Dr. Broderick in London, and then together they traveled to Paris to attend the convention. Dr. Pankey spent 2 days seeing the sights of Paris before he looked up Dr. Halley Smith. Actually, he had a hard time finding Dr. Halley Smith in the Place Vendôme. His office was located on about the 3rd or 4th floor, that he had to go up a real small elevator above all of these high-dollar stores of jewelry and clothes and so on. And he said that all he could see was this little brass plaque about the size of 2 thumbnails with 3 letters, D-H-S, engraved on it. The door was locked, he said, so I pulled the tassel at the end of a long rope by the door. The door was opened by a gentleman wearing cutaway coat and striped trousers, holding a silver platter asking for my card. He said I didn't have a card, so I gave him the slip of paper which Dr. Davis had written Dr. Smith's name and address. Dr. Halley Smith came and greeted him warmly. He gave him a personal tour of the office. He had 5 dental technicians and 3 associates. In the reception room was a fireplace, and above the fireplace was a beautiful painting of Dr. Halley Smith in all of his golf attire. The 2 men spent much time together following the meeting because Dr. Halley Smith was in charge of this international conference. And Dr. Pankey learned at the conference about hydrocolloid impression material, and he gave the first clinic in the United States at the Florida West Coast Dental Society meeting in October 1931. They talked about communications, and Dr. Halley Smith asked, "So you took the Bosworth course? Isn't that the dental supply man who suggests we offer one price for a good job, another price for a halfway job, and I'll louse it up for you for a reasonable price?" Well, Dr. Pankey said, "Yeah, but what am I going to do for these people who come to me and say they can't afford me?" Dr. Halley Smith said, "You need to tell them the optimum way their dentistry should be done, and then what they do is their own decision. If you're going to make a compromise with them, then compromise on the basis of knowledge, not because you have prejudged them. You should tell every patient what optimum dental care would do. If they decide to go elsewhere, leave the door open for them to come back." Dr. Halley Smith's lifestyle and words of wisdom were an inspiration to Dr. Pankey's vision and his philosophy. And Dr. Halley Smith told Dr. Pankey he needed more knowledge about examination and diagnosis and periodontal disease. And he suggested that he attend a 3-month course at Northwestern to learn more. And he gave Dr. Pankey a piece of paper, and written on it was a verse. And he said, "I want you to read this every week for the rest of your life." And Dr. Pankey kept this piece of paper under the glass top of his desk, and he read it every week until it was faded beyond unreadable. And it was a quote from Allen, who said, "As you think, you travel, and as you love, you attract. You are today where your thoughts take you. You cannot escape the results of your thoughts, but you can endure and learn. You can accept and be glad. You will realize the vision, not the idle wish, of your heart, be it base or beautiful, or a mixture of both. for you will always gravitate toward that which you secretly most love. Into your hands will be placed the exact results of your thoughts. You will receive that which you earn, no more, no less. Whatever your present environment may be, you will fall, remain, or rise with your thoughts, your vision, your ideals. You will become as small as your controlling desire